the sections of this book are headed up with Hank Williams titles, and they are exactly what you would think. Your Cheating Heart and all the other duplicitous, crooked, broken-hearted stuff that moves through the Hank Williams songs and, of course, through these stories. The elemental noir story is, I think, the Maltese Falcon. It has everything in it. And there's a wonderful line in there that Sam Spade says, when somebody kills your partner, you're supposed to do something about it. And that sets in motion, of course, that kind of story. And of the 15 stories in the book, the one that comes closest to that, I think, is Michelle Richmond's story. Michelle, would you say a word about it? And I'll ask each of the writers, where's the story set? When is it set? And what's the nub of it?
So, hi, Don. It's so good to see you. It's good to see all of you. And thanks to the bookstore for hosting us. What Brings You Back Home is set in Mobile, where I spent the first 17 years of my life, and opens with the narrator driving through West Mobile from the airport past the neighborhood where her family used to have some land that they lost. But the gist of the story is that she's on a mission to kill a senator, to assassinate a senator in revenge for the death of her husband and daughter to a mass shooting in Northern California.
And this senator, strong proponent of the Second Amendment.
Yes.
And praised for gun rights. And now we'll see how he feels about having a lot of odd guns brought to his house by a vengeful mother and wife. In fact, one of the backs and forth of emails with the publisher was about Michelle's story. And they were skeptical that you could sell a book in Alabama in which there was a story that was very, very strongly for control, even elimination of assault weapons. But of course,
I can see that.
But this suggests that the people who open the book in the bookstore and read the first page or two are also going to have personal arsenals. And I think these groups are, if not mutually exclusive, there's damn little overlap. But yes, Brad, you're right there. You have an odd story. When and where is it? And give us the nub of it.
It's set in Gulf Shores in 1979, while Hurricane Frederick is building up and about to come in and wipe it out. And it's specifically, it's a little oldie shop that is based on a shop that actually used to be over in Northwest Florida, but I sort of reimagined it on the East Beach in Gulf Shores. That old shop was called the Museum of the Sea and Indian. It was very much an anachronism, something from the 50s. And it's about a teenage girl who is severely affected by severe scoliosis and suffers a lot of abuse, especially from her guardian, who is her aunt, a bedridden old woman who has abused her enough to make her want to take some measure against the old lady, and she does.
It's wrong to kill old ladies, but nevertheless, Thom, I see you're with us now. Welcome, welcome. Tell us where are you sitting at this moment, and then go ahead and tell us where's the story set, and give us the gist of it.
I'm in Fort Walton Beach. You want to know my story is Xena, Queen of the Dark. Why Xena, Queen of the Dark? It's the first time I've written with a female protagonist, and I've been wanting to do that. And Xena is a modern day, I see, even though it's modern day, I see this in black and white. And she is a disc jockey in the modern day world, has an internet radio show that goes out all over the world. and she works the midnight to 6 a.m. shift, and that's why it's Xena up here in the Queen of the Dark. The story goes on. She starts in Los Angeles and Santa Monica. She gets run out of town by somebody who accuses her of having an abortion and starts this whole talk show thing about abortion. And she becomes the bad person, even though she didn't have the abortion. And basically drives her insane. And she gets out of the business for a while, and she makes her comeback in Birmingham, which is where I'm from. And growing up, I always got to hang out with the disc jockeys, and so I have an affinity for that world. She has to make her comeback, and so the story takes place with a lot of flashbacks, but it takes place the night that she makes her comeback, takes place at midnight till 6 a.m. that morning.
Right, and she is the victim of that. Your story, as dark as it is, could not have been written even not more than 10 years ago, because it's cyber stalking. It is a kind of social media cyber stalking story that is really amazingly has to be contemporary.
Yes.
Daniel.
Yeah.
We know where you are. Tell us about
why I am.
Yes, why are we here? At the time that I contacted Daniel Wallace, he was writing short shorts and didn't want to stop doing that to create a noir story. But when we looked at the short shorts that Daniel was writing, they were plenty dark enough. And so in the novel, in the collection, we put 3 of them.
I'm really appreciative that you did. It's a little bit of a stretch, I think, having those stories in this book with all these real great, honest to God noir stories. But I love noir, and Raymond Chandler has always been one of my big best reads. And in fact, in one of my books, I tried to write a whole section of it in kind of hard-boiled style, and it didn't work out at all. And it's really, really hard to write in that style really successfully. So I have avoided it ever since. But the one that stands out for me, just thinking about it now, is How to Build a Coffin. And I love that story, or the root of that story. I mean, basically, it's just this guy building a coffin and directions on how to do it. But that came from this experience I had going up to someone's house. I had to interview this woman who lived in this beautiful mansion in Virginia, and she and her husband had found it and come to the mansion. Somebody was already living there, and they said, "We want to buy your house." And the husband said, "Well, I want to sell it to you, but we have to wait until my wife dies. She's going to die fairly soon, and as soon as she does, I'll sell you the house." But time passed, and she didn't die, and they kept coming back to the house. And he said, "Well, look, why don't you start living in one of the outbuildings?" Because they had the big house and other smaller houses, "and fix one of these up, and you can live in it until she dies." So they said that's a really good idea, and started to renovate the outbuilding to make it really, really nice for them to stay in. And I just imagined, the wife who's up in the bedroom dying, hearing the construction men working on this outbuilding, which she knows has to be for the people who are waiting for her to die. So that is actually, what I just said was longer than the actual story.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, and the story is about literally building a coffin.
Yes.
It's a how-to story.
How-to story, yeah.
And I don't know if anybody present here will have seen this, but before the pandemic struck and we were doing live readings and signings, Daniel, living up in North Carolina, could not be there. And so as a part of the program, I would read your story, How to Build a Coffin. And I have to say, people just loved it. I didn't read it as well as you do, but I read it well enough so they really liked it. and it was one of the things that people talked about. It gets a lot done. Your shorts get a lot done in mood rather than action, so to speak.
Well, I think what people really like about stories like that is that they are short and they don't have to put up with them.
You are a Raymond Chandler fan. And part of what I want to ask is, in the noir canon, who do you like? Michelle, which of the noirists, or novel or film, is the kind of thing that you normally recommend to other people that you like best?
Since you so graciously sent us this question beforehand, I thought about it, and I thought, I don't know that I've read a lot of noir, but the first book that came to mind was Marisha Pessel's Night Film, which I recommend. It's a young woman is murdered, and she turns out to be the daughter of a noir film director, a really mysterious noir film director who creates these really brutal films. So that's a strange and very disturbing book. And a film that I saw last year that I think fits the first film that came to mind was Rear Window, and I don't know if that's noir, but it feels noir to me. The film that comes to mind that I've seen recently is called Elle. It stars Isabelle Huppert, and she is seeking revenge upon her rapist, but she doesn't know who he is. And it's a terrifying and really good movie.
Well, noir didn't stop in 1940. I mean, it's not all Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. I in terms of films, I thought Blue Velvet was about as odd and scary and fairly modern, not that new anymore, but the notion of darkness and fear and an unhappy ending continues perpetually. Watson, what do you think?
I'm glad you mentioned Blue Velvet. I didn't even think of that, but that is one of the creepiest noir movies I've ever seen. Well, among the hard-boiled guys, detective hard-boiled noir stuff, I guess the person I've read the most of lately is Ross MacDonald. Not John D. MacDonald, but Ross MacDonald, the guy who said in the fictional version of Santa Barbara, California. And I really I like his novels. I like the way, I think he's a really good writer in general. And he also writes this, really great detective hard-boiled noir. So he's one of my favorites. Actually, when we were coming up on this, I said, I wonder what the definition of noir is. And so, I Googled it, of course, and they were talking about noir being just one of the kind of hard-boiled, genres, and that some aren't, the detective ones. So I thought, well, what do I like that's not actually, doesn't have a detective in it, that's just dark anyway. And I thought I'd recently reread Jim Harrison's novella Revenge, which was a really good noir of that sort. And then I thought, man, what about our friend William Gay's story, The Paperhanger?
Oh, yes.
That's an incredibly dark, creepy, beautifully written short story. That's one of the most noirish things I've ever read. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. John D. MacDonald is certainly not the same person. And Travis McGee, who's a Don Quixote on a houseboat, has little adventures, but they're not dark. Tom, what do you like?
Yeah, I'm more into the film thing. I don't know. I can't tell you the directors or what have you, but I know the look, I know the feel, I know pretty much it's one of those I like what I like, but I watch it every Sunday morning. And, there's just a lot of recurring stuff that happens. There's this greatness, there's the dame, the dame's always, she gets it in the end because she's a dame. And there's a good guy who can't handle himself, and so he gets taken advantage of. It's just wonderful to watch, and it wraps up pretty much in about 90 minutes or less. And, you know, I just enjoy it. But I don't read a lot of it. I did, a man said he looked up the definition. I did as well. It says a crime film of fiction characterized by cynicism, fatalism, and moral ambiguity. And it describes it as being dark with stark lighting and that type stuff. So I just think they're fun to watch, and I had fun doing this.
All right.
I read the same website you did, I think.
Yes, right.
And I think it's funny, Thom, that so many of us Googled Noir, because when you reached out with the assignment, and I love an assignment because it gives me something to write that I absolutely wouldn't have otherwise written. I was like, well, I mean, I sort of had a vague idea in my head, but I had to Google it too. And I just Googled it again before this started, and I saw the same webpage that Thom saw. And I also saw something that said that you have a protagonist who really bows to his or her baser instincts. And I thought, okay, yeah, I can
Michelle,
see that in all of the stories.
Oh, yes. You communicated with me recently that you were going to do more with your short story. Is that still the case?
Yes, Don, you gave me by giving me this assignment, I think you gave me my next book.
Wow.
So thank you.
So you're making it into a novel.
It'll be a short novel, but it will be a novel.
Novels are good. The reason I gave a kind of heads up that I would be asking which noir writer might be your favorite, or which film or whatever, is, you know, this is all of you, everyone here. This is practically universal. I read a book every 3 days, all my adult life. And if somebody walks up to me at a party and says, have you read anything good lately? I can't remember ever having read anything ever. My mind goes completely blank. Have you seen any good movies lately? What are movies? Just everything just stops. And over time, when I've interviewed writers, I've often asked them, you know, what books did you read when you were a child, or what books are important to you, or what have you read recently? And nobody ever knows. So now when I interview people, I tell them in advance to write it down, something that they read recently or something that they like. And that tends to work. It's not fake, it's real. It's just that in the moment, we all get some kind of brain freeze.
Yeah.
One of the things I asked all of you to think about was, in the volume, there are 15 stories and you have one. What kind of shout out might you want to give? Is there a story in this book that you read and you thought, well, good for you, Tommy, or good for you, Ace, or Daniel, or whatever, story that particularly tickled you or pleased you?
Well, yeah, it's kind of hard because there are so many. I mean, I even used Danny's stories in a class I taught this summer, you know, so, and just really love them. And Michelle's, I thought, was, for not having written any noir, and Michelle, it's one of the purest noir pieces, according to the definition on the site. We all, you know,
Yes,
it's right in there. And then I thought maybe I was going to do Anthony Grimm's story because it's so Chekhovian. These guys sitting around talking, telling a story. But finally, you know, since I love poison so much, since it's poison figures in my story, it seems like, I mean, I was telling Tom Franklin one day, I said, my God, it seems like I can't think of any other crime besides like poisoning somebody else. And but you know, this one's here too. There's poisoning in there, and there's a wonderful poisoning story that Robbie Howard has. I love the story of a little old lady helping a guy avoid the electric chair by making him a poisoned cake, you know, and figuring out how to get around the warden to do it.
Yeah, that's the electric chair story that the cover would have been perfect for it. Tom, what did you like when you were reading around in the book?
So I'm gonna ask Michelle, is the story you got in here the one you're gonna turn into a book?
Yeah.
That's my favorite.
Aww.
I like that story. I really did. I liked it a lot.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just thought I described things as fun, but it was just I could see it as a movie, and I could see the visual part of it, and I just thought it was an interesting concept, a female hit person, woman hit person, and
And an
That's
amateur.
about-
She's not
Yeah,
a,
yeah.
not
I-
a professional criminal.
Yeah, it was very good, very interesting.
Daniel?
Well, first of all, Don, if you had come to me with this cover issue before this, I would have changed the story to how to build an electric chair. If that would have allowed you to have the cover that you wanted. It turned out, I thought it was a great collection, so many good stories. I had to read my Winston Groom story. He's my stepfather once removed. Not everybody knows that, but so I had to read his, and I thought his was hilarious. And Ace Atkins, he is probably the most famous Alabama author who I've read the least of, I think. Because I understand he's all that in a bag of chips, and I haven't had an opportunity to read him, but I thought his story was really well done.
Yeah, he has 22 novels now. And
It was 22?
And recently had a film made by Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah.
Ace is really moving fast, working very hard, putting out more than a book a year. Something that is, when you all looked up, Googled Noir, one of the elements in Noir was always the femme fatale. And I should say that although Michelle Richmond's protagonist is a dangerous woman, God knows, she's not the typical femme fatale, but there are two, at least in this collection. One is Wendy Reed's story, in which you have the real sexy number. But Daniel mentioning Winston, I don't know if Winston Groom ever wrote a short story before this. I've never seen one by him, and I had to cajole him considerably. He didn't want to do it, of course. He had lots of other things to do. But I suggested that the story and he would not have to travel at all, that he could write a story that took place in the Grand Hotel, which is across the street from his house, and on the golf course, which is in back of his house. And he got back to me and he said, well, yeah, of course, I can do that. So his story, which is one of the, and again, this is something unusual about this book. There's a lot of humor in this book. There are some laughs in this book. Daniel's stories have some chuckles, dark as they are, but several of the stories are comic relief of a sort. And I think Winston's is, I think Ace Atkins' story, which is going to end badly, but it's pretty funny as it goes along. And many of you, I can tell, already own the book and have read some of these, and you know what I'm talking about. But others, if you fear 15 stories in a row of darkness, be assured that there are some light spots. This is the place where everybody gets a chance to ask a question, and of course the writers may ask questions of one another if you're inclined, or other participants. Anyone may ask anything of anybody here. This is the time we've allotted for it.
I have a question for Brad. The end of your story, without giving it away, is it as dark as we think it is?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It's nightmarish.
It horrific. Yes, it was great.
Well,
But-
let me ask a question back on that regard. Is the end of Suzanne's story as dark as I think it is?
Well, it's not in the story, but I'm sure it is. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's where that woman is going to end up.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
I'm quite sure. One of the things that's fun about Noir is there's always, I guess there has to be a death, but it's not going to stop with shooting or stabbing or poisoning. I mean, these stories are death by a dozen different means, including, of course, death by alligator, which is oddly enough in two of the stories. Now, there's a coincidence that I did not see coming, but nevertheless, it's the case. But you got to get those people killed one way or another, and the Noir writers use a huge variety of method.
I have to say, Brad, at first, when I got to the end of your story and there's a splash in the water, I thought that the aunt was like just sort of recovering and still alive. But I'm giving it away to people who haven't read it yet. But she was previously deceased, right? Like she's
Yeah,
totally
she doesn't
previously
actually die
deceased.
by the gator.
Well, we'll see. Jeannie has a question.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say this is one of the coolest things I've seen since the shutdown. And so thank you, Don, and thank you, Ernest and Hadley, for doing this. It's just so great to see everyone. My question is, I wonder why, or if you all have any thoughts about why it is that people are so addicted to noir. Why do they need it? Why do they crave it? And it's not really about COVID-19, because this was all going on before COVID-19, but what is it? This is kind of a dark question, but what is it that makes people need this, want this, and consider it an art form? Well, I'd like to hear from, okay, I'll throw it to Brad.
Yeah, I don't know. I love it. I really do love it. I think some of it has to do. I think one of the things that's really great about good noir is mood, atmosphere, and place. And how much they really put you into place and a time, and sort of I feel immersed in the place, and also thereby, I guess, in the mystery, in the darkness of what has happened and what people are trying to do about it. Just, I would love to write more. I'm trying to write it, but yeah, like Dan said, it's hard.
Yeah, I think it also sometimes feels like the best kind of escapism, and you can watch someone do the sort of thing that you like to think that you would never do, and maybe get away with it. And so I think it appeals to that little devil inside us that is normally so well behaved and doesn't want to be.
Yeah.
And Jeannie, it's so good to see you.
Good to see
Jeannie, I was just going to say that I love the film noir movies, and I've read a lot about them, and the reason that they have a French name is, the first one that people sort of identify is the Maltese Falcon, which came out in 1941, but in France, they didn't see those movies until the end of the war. They saw a whole bunch of them right at the end of the war, and they were the ones who sort of identified that there was a common thread between them. Americans had no idea they were making a film genre. So I think for the French, they were not just beautifully, they were beautiful aesthetically, but they might have also been, as Michelle was saying, very cathartic, very, the French had gone through, what we know they went through. And I think that it was just, it was incredible escapism, and they saw something in this Hollywood form that we didn't even know we were creating. So,
Tom, what do you think about that?
I think noir is first cousin to tragedy, and I think we theater goers and readers, for 2,000 years we've enjoyed watching a man kill his father, marry his mother, and then put out his own eyes. Or if you go to see Hamlet, if you keep count during Hamlet, you realize that you have to have a large stage to accommodate all the corpses. So there's the notion of death, mayhem, grief, guilt, revenge. There's nothing new. I mean, it is classical Greek. It is Renaissance England. There's a part of us that just, really revels in the blood and the mayhem.
I think it's escapism. I think you escape into this world, and they get to do things that I think somebody said ordinary people don't get to do, and you get sucked into those characters. And even though they do dumb things, you like them. They're fun people. And it's not going to have a happy ending, but that's part of the fun of it, I guess.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things that when we all Google Noir, one of the things that you'll see, maybe not on the top, but in the extended definition, is that this is not a police procedural. A police procedural is another beast altogether. The detective is not carry a badge. The killer may be an amateur, and the detective may be a private detective, but he's not going to be a law enforcement officer. It's not FBI. It's not NYPD Blue. It is slightly off to one side, and we can identify more with the amateurs that go along. Sometimes all the characters are amateurs, although somebody like Sam Spade has a private detective license. He's not a policeman. Continental Op is not a policeman.
Right.
And the amateur is often in conflict with the professional cops, and so they generally are in conflict.
Often they are.
Yeah.
I tell you what, though, you got to say, and that makes me want to mention. I don't know who might have read that. There's a series of 10 police procedurals written by a couple in Sweden in the 1960s, Maj Sjöwall and Per Walu. They wrote them together. They were reporters, and they pretty much revolutionized that genre. And there are 10 novels in it, and they're really good. And the thing about it that made me want to mention it is that, yeah, it's a procedural, but is really, really atmospheric, and you really got this dark, noirish feeling about Stockholm and the other places where the novels take place. I recommend them reading if you like this stuff. I think you'd like those, and they're different. You know, they're just really
Scandinavia for you.
Yeah, right. I mean,
I
there
have
was
to
a
hold up the book from
beginning of
time
the
to time.
Scandinavian noir.
See,
It's really kind of there. Sorry, I mean,
this
yes,
is a part of the deal here. Is I hold up the book, and that way you can identify it when you see it.
You go.
Well, if you get tired of Birmingham, you can just go to Stockholm. It's good stuff too.
Well,
I read those years ago, and it was the first time I fully immersed in crime fiction of any kind, and I found them absolutely addicting. And they're very short. Also, most of them are short books, and that's when I like I think I sort of read these Scandinavian, current ones too, Scandinavian thrillers and psychological horror stories, just sort of like candy. I love them. It's hard to put them down, but it's often like, it can mess with your mind and make you a little nervous at night, but they're wonderful.
I wanted to ask Wendy what she might share with us about how she cooked up her story. And I particularly was intrigued by the name De Bartolé Wynn.
Yes, yes.
Where that came from, and then the whole setting of Custom Meats.
Well, when I sat down to start writing from the assignment, I'm like Michelle, I love an assignment. I'm a deadline animal. And so I pulled some old Edgar Allan Poe and a collection of Brad Watson. So thanks, Brad. And that was beside me. And I read through as I started. But I really don't know what, I have no idea what
really?
like for that storyline. But I credit Dawn for the name because I was trying to think of some name that would hold, some prominence in Alabama. And that one's close.
Yeah, I'd say.
It was a lot closer until Dawn changed it. So
I see. Interesting. Okay, that's very interesting.
I mean, it really, I started in my head. I don't know a single de Bartoleben, but I have read that name so much in research. And so I used that name. And I think Don and Jennifer wisely said, we might not want to use that name. So we got close.
Well, I laughed out loud.
I'm glad.
I didn't laugh much more after that.
I'm still a little horrified myself.
I can't tell you how delighted I am to hear that, Wendy.
So Brad, I have a question for you. The alligator, the eyes of the alligator. You have probably have multiple experience in dealing with alligators, just from your description of the animal. Yes, Pop?
A little bit. When I lived in Gulf Shores, there were a couple who lived in a canal just right down the street from me, and the place that gave me the inspiration for this story, they actually did have a small pit with a gigantic, overgrown, under exercise alligator in it. But yeah.
It says. I mean, I spent 2 years in Avery Island, Louisiana, living next to a pond that had a big 12-footer named George. And I used to sit on the shore of that, watching the eyes of this animal looking at me. And he had a busted jaw because he tried to drag in a cow. But
my God.
I tell you, when I read the story, I thought, oh my God, I know I'm gonna have nightmares about George tonight and this alligator. And thank you for not chopping up her body and having her throw it down, just like the chicken parts where the chickens were thrown down. That I would have just horrible nightmares about.
I got to tell you, I think one thing that made alligators stick with me more than anything else was when we were, I think in something like '97, thinking of moving to Gainesville, Florida, so I could teach there. And we went around with a real estate agent. And at that time, Owen, our son, was 3 years old. And she said, let me show you this place out here, this new subdivision. And we drove out and we went through a swamp. And on either side of the swamp on the road, there were alligators sitting there kind of snapping, as you go by. And we got to the place where the neighborhood was, and it was an artificial landfill, built up berm. And right there in the middle of that swamp. And I thought, you really think I'm going to buy a house where my child is going to play in the backyard next to a swamp full of alligators? I don't know. They're still up my imagination.
Well, the eyes were very believable, and thank you for that imagery. And it may curse you in the morning when I can't sleep, but it was a wonderful story.
Thanks.
Avery, what?
Oh, I have a question for Daniel. The Men in the Woods made me laugh out loud a couple of times. And I was it was sort of the idea of like these feral former businessmen roaming around in the woods. I thought that was very funny. What was your inspiration for that particular short story?
Mountain Brook. Yeah, you see these.
It's so woodsy.
Such a woodsy place. Yeah, a lot of bank presidents and finance kings out in the woods eating squirrels over the fire. No, you go over to the apartment of a man who's been recently divorced. This one of the saddest things, and it's. I just imagined all of these recently divorced country club denizens not even have that, just have this little fire out in the back and near a creek. Yeah. Just went from there.
I really enjoyed that one.
Thank you.
I just wanted to go back to the alligator for a minute, and I know which alligator you're talking about in Gulf Shores. That's really a impressive alligator. But I had this idea of like alligator noir because you kept feeding that alligator the most awful things. I mean, you're feeding him alarm clocks and people's nightgowns. And so I'm like, at the end of the thing, I'm thinking he probably died too. I'm thinking, he surely must have. Did he not? Or is that the sequel?
I'd like to think that he finally got his freedom when that hurricane rolled in and raised him. Had a little bit of freedom before he passed on.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I was like real identified. But I was like, oh my God, don't feed him that. Don't feed him. You know, I'm just like, but I guess they eat all kinds of stuff eventually. But I mean, I don't know. He sure had a lot in his. He had a lot in his. He had a lot in his belly by the end of that story. I mean, he really did.
Yeah, I think that girl, she was hoping, I think, to give the gator a taste for her old aunt.
Yeah. It was a good. But that gator that you were talking about, that's a huge gator. I think Chucky was his name. I think, wasn't it? I think.
You fed him a whole chicken every day.
Yeah, huge. Anyway.
Well,
yeah, the great stories. Great stories all around.
I won't do my Vera Lynn imitation as much unless there's a real demand for it. But I will say, we'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when.
That's good.
But we'll meet again some sunny day.
Thank you.
So good to see you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to see you all.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
A lot of fun. Really interesting.
Oh yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.